Well, hello. My name is Jules Ostrander, and I'm a cattle rancher from Nebraska, out near Wyoming. God's given me a burden for New York and the country, for revival, and to see God's people turn back to the things of God. As far as my time here in New York, that really began back in 2001 after the towers went down. I guess about 8:30 in the morning as I'm managing the cattle ranch. I came into the house and my mother said, "Have you seen this?" And she pointed to the TV, and of course I had no idea what she was speaking of. But God began to stir my heart from that day forward that somebody ought to be tromping across America to warn church people, pastors, businessmen that we need to be repenting and turning from the sins of the country, reevaluating where we're at before God. A few weeks went by and God led in some other details and impressed upon me that He wanted me in Lower Manhattan praying. So I took 3 weeks off from work, and I told my wife we'll just make it a faith trip to see and authenticate that God is in this thing. And so with 3/4 of a tank of gasoline and $56, I headed off alone for New York City. I only knew one man in the state, a man I'd gone to school with years ago. And 3.5 weeks later, I found myself in Smithtown, New York on a Sunday night. And I was so frazzled and dazzled by the traffic that I'll never be able to drive in this place. But over the months have gone by since then, I find myself quite comfortable driving the 495 expressway. But on Monday morning, Brother Scott took me down to Ground Zero, and we started walking around the building and meeting people and experiencing the major hit that we as America had taken. And people were crying, and there were posters all over the walls, as many of you know that had been there. And God just was deepening into me what had occurred. And some Western churches gave me money to go take to the widows of firemen. So I found myself going to meeting widows, and in one case they brought a child out and introduced me to the child that had been born after Dad had died that day. And I got emotional, and God sunk way into my bones, I guess you could say, the reality of what had occurred. We got way beyond the statistics and the television thing. But I began to meet people, strangers in Lower Manhattan, prayer meetings, etc., and that began to give me rides out of the city. Said, "You don't need to be riding the train, we'll give you a ride." It wasn't long before I was given a speaking engagement in one of the churches out in Dix Hills on Long Island. What my assignment had been to come to New York for 3 weeks, off from work, get my foot on some of the remains of the towers and pray. And confess the sins of America, pray for the president, pray for the church, believe God for revival. But the whole thing expanded out, and I didn't get back to the ranch for 5.5 weeks. And then I was only home for 10 days and right straight back to New York. And God has given me a burden. He's put a fire in me and a zeal and an expectation and an anticipation that revival is coming, and the greatest move that New York and the country has ever seen is yet to come. God is doing that, and so I'm crossing denominational lines. And to back up a bit, before I came to the city, God kept me awake one night and to list out what He called the sins of America. And one of the number one sin that He said I want listed is